The transport ship dropped Jake Martinez at the main gate of the Galactic Defense Academy. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the huge building that stretched into the purple sky. 3 suns burned overhead, casting strange shadows that moved in ways that hurt his eyes. Everything here was different from Earth. Jake picked up his single bag and walked toward the entrance. The doors opened by themselves, which still surprised him even after 2 weeks of space travel. Inside, the academy was bigger than any building he had ever seen. The ceiling was so high that clouds formed near the top. Strange creatures moved. Through the halls, some walking, some floating, some crawling on walls like spiders. A tall, green-scaled being approached him. It had yellow eyes and sharp teeth that showed when it spoke. "You are the human," it said in perfect English, though. Its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "I am Commander Zethkri. Follow me." Jake nodded and followed the creature down a long hallway. The walls were covered with pictures of past graduates. Most of them looked nothing like humans. Some had too many arms. Some had no arms at all. Some looked like walking trees, others like living crystals that caught the light and threw rainbows everywhere. The Academy has trained soldiers from 17 different worlds for 300 years, Commander Zethkri explained as they walked. Each species brings something unique to our program. Speed, strength, intelligence, special abilities. What do humans bring? Jake thought about it. Back on Earth, he was just an average soldier. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest. "I guess we don't give up easy," he said. The commander made a sound that might have been laughter. "Many species say that. We will see if humans are different." They stopped at a large room filled with beds. Each bed was different, built for different types of bodies. Some were tanks filled with liquid. Others were hanging nets, and a few looked almost normal. Commander Zethkri pointed to a regular bed in the corner. "Yours," he said. "Your squad mates will arrive soon." Jake put his bag on the bed and looked around. The room had controls everywhere, buttons and screens in colors he had never seen before. A voice came from speakers hidden in the walls, speaking in a language that sounded like music mixed with static. "That was the dinner call," the commander said. "Come. You will meet your squad." The dining hall was massive, with thousands of creatures eating at tables that floated in the air or sat on the floor or hung from the ceiling. The smell was a mix of flowers, meat, and something that reminded Jake of burning plastic. His stomach turned, but he followed the commander to a table where 4 other beings waited. "Squad 7, Commander Zethkri announced. "Meet your human team member." The first creature looked almost human except for having 4 arms and skin that changed colors like a mood ring. "I am Veltar," it said in a voice like wind chimes. "I come from the 3rd moon of Kepler Prime. The gravity there is lighter than here." Next was something that looked like a giant ant walking on 2 legs. Its black shell reflected the light, and its eyes were huge and dark. "Crix," it said simply. "Hive world. Fast reflexes." The third being was the strangest yet. It looked like a jellyfish made of light floating a few inches above its chair. When it spoke, the words appeared in Jake's mind rather than coming through his ears. "Noma. Water moon. I can move through some solid things." The last creature was more familiar, looking like a cross between a bear and a gorilla covered in thick gray fur. It was easily twice Jake's size. "Durgan," it said in a deep voice. "Heavy world. Strong." Jake sat down at the table. "Jake Martinez. Earth. I'm not sure what makes me special. Veltar's skin shifted to a warm yellow color. All species are special here. You must have something, or they would not have invited humans to join. The food that appeared in front of Jake looked like nothing he had ever seen. Some of it glowed, some of it moved, and some of it seemed to be made of what looked like metal shavings. He watched his squad mates eat and tried to copy them. The glowing stuff tasted like chicken, which was a relief. "How long is training?" Jake asked. 6 months, Durgan rumbled. "If you survive, many do not finish. Not because they die, but because they cannot handle the pressure." Crix's head tilted to one side. "What is Earth like? We have heard little about human worlds." Jake thought about how to explain Earth to these creatures. It's got one big yellow sun, lots of water, and the gravity is about average, I think. Lots of different weather, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, sometimes violent storms. Noma's thoughts touched his mind again. Average gravity. That explains your normal build. Most species evolve for their home conditions. "What about dangerous animals?" Veltar asked, now shifting to a curious blue color. Jake laughed. "Yeah, we've got some. Bears, sharks, snakes, lots of things that can kill you if you're not careful. But humans are pretty good at dealing with them." Durgan leaned forward. "How good?" "Well, most of the really dangerous ones are either extinct or we've learned to stay away from them. The ones that are left, we hunt for sport sometimes." The table went quiet. The other squad members looked at each other with expressions Jake couldn't read. "You hunt your predators for fun?" Crix asked. "Some people do. I never did much hunting myself, but yeah, it's pretty common." Commander Zethkree had been listening from a nearby table. He made notes on a device that looked like a crystal tablet. In his experience, species usually fell into clear categories. Veltar's people were fast and agile, but weak. Crix's kind had incredible reflexes, but poor endurance. Noma's species could phase through matter, but were fragile. Durgan's people were strong but slow. Humans seemed to fit right in the middle of everything. Average gravity meant average strength and speed. Nothing remarkable. The commander wrote "standard support species" in his notes. After dinner, Jake followed his squad back to their sleeping quarters. The lights dimmed automatically as night fell, though with 3 suns, night here was more like twilight on Earth. "Tomorrow we start real training," Durgan said as he settled onto his reinforced bed. "Physical tests, weapons training, tactical exercises. You will learn what you are made of." Jake lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling where strange patterns of light moved like slow lightning. He thought about home, about the mountains where he grew up, about the basic training he had completed before being selected for this program. The gravity here felt exactly like Earth, which was supposed to be lucky. Most species had to adjust to different conditions. He closed his eyes and listened to the sounds his squad mates made as they settled in for sleep. Veltar hummed softly. Crix made clicking sounds. Noma was silent, and Durgan snored like a diesel engine. Tomorrow would bring challenges he had never imagined. Jake smiled in the darkness. Whatever this place threw at him, he would handle it. That's what humans did. They adapted, they survived, and they kept going when others quit. He didn't know it yet, but that simple human trait was about to change everything at the Galactic Defense Academy. Jake woke to the sound of alarms that felt like they were drilling into his brain. The lights in the sleeping quarters flashed red 3 times, then went to bright white. Around him, his squad mates were already moving. Veltar flowed out of, bed like water, all four arms working to gather gear. Crix moved in quick, jerky motions that reminded Jake of a hummingbird. Nama simply appeared standing next to its bed, having phased through the blankets. Durgan rolled off his reinforced bed with a thud that shook the floor. "First day," Durgan said, his voice still thick with sleep. "Try not to die." Jake pulled on the training uniform they had given him the night before. It was made of some material that felt like rubber but looked like metal. The other squad members wore similar uniforms, but each was designed for their body type. Veltar's had 4 armholes, Crix's covered his shell, and Durgan's looked like it could stop a truck. They joined a stream of trainees flowing toward the main training hall. Jake counted at least 50 different species in the crowd. Some walked. On legs, others floated. A few rolled along the ground like living boulders. The noise was incredible. Voices, clicks, whistles, sounds that hurt to hear, and some forms of communication that Jake felt rather than heard. The training hall was the size of a football stadium. The floor, walls, and ceiling were covered in a gray material that seemed to absorb light. Instructor platforms floated above the main floor, where various alien beings watched everything with intense focus. Commander Zethkree's voice boomed from speakers everywhere. "New trainees report to Station 1. Returning trainees, continue your programs." Station 1 turned out to be a simple running track that curved around one section of the hall. A floating platform held an instructor that looked like a walking stick insect, but the size of a person. "I am Instructor Thelnex," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "You will run until I tell you to stop. Begin now." The group started, running. Jake fell into an easy pace, the kind he had used during morning runs back on Earth. Around him, his squad mates found their own rhythms. Veltar moved like a dancer, barely touching the ground. Crix's legs moved so fast they were almost a blur, but he took tiny steps. Noma floated just above the track, moving forward without any visible effort. Durgan pounded along like a freight train, each step heavy but steady. After 10 minutes, some of the other species began to slow down. After 20 minutes, a few stopped completely and moved to the side of the track. After 30 minutes, half. The group was walking or had quit entirely. Jake was still running at his original pace. He felt good, like he was just getting warmed up. His breathing was steady. His legs felt strong, and his mind was clear. Back home, he regularly ran for an hour or more without thinking much about it. Instructor Thelnex made notes on a crystal device. The human was running at exactly the same speed he had started with. No faster, no slower. His form was efficient, but not particularly impressive. Just steady and consistent. At the 45-minute mark, only Jake, Durgan, and 3 other trainees from different squads were still running at their original pace. Everyone else had either stopped or slowed significantly. "Enough," Instructor Thelnex announced. "Endurance testing complete." Jake slowed to a walk, then stopped. He wasn't even breathing hard. Durgan came up beside him, panting heavily but grinning. "Good run, human. You have decent stamina for a middleweight species." The next test was strength. They moved to a section of the hall filled with weights and machines that looked like torture devices from a science fiction movie. The weights were made of the same light-absorbing material as the walls, and they felt heavier than they looked. Veltar went first, lifting, with all 4 arms at once. The weight that would have been heavy for Jake looked easy for the 4-armed alien. Crix surprised everyone by lifting twice his body weight, his insect physiology giving him incredible strength for his size. Noma simply phased through the weight, which apparently counted as a different type of test. Durgan lifted more than anyone else as expected. When Jake's turn came, he lifted a respectable amount. Not as much as Durgan, not as efficiently as Veltar, but solid and steady. The instructors marked him down as adequate strength for body mass. Speed tests came next. Veltar flew across the course like he was born for it. Crix moved in bursts that were too fast to follow clearly. Durgan was slower but unstoppable, like watching a tank accelerate. Noma simply appeared at the finish line, having moved through obstacles instead of around them. Jake ran the course at a good pace. Not the fastest, not the slowest. His technique was sound, his movements efficient, but nothing that made the instructors take special notice. Average speed, good form, they noted. Weapons training was held in a different section of the hall. Each species had weapons designed for their physiology and combat style. Jake was given what looked like a rifle crossed with a ray gun. It fired bolts of energy that left scorch marks on targets. Veltar was graceful with weapons, able to fire 4 different guns at once while moving like he was dancing. Crix had reflexes that let him hit targets almost before they appeared. Noma could shoot through walls by phasing the weapon barrel through solid matter. Durgan's shots hit with enough force to knock over the target stands. Jake's accuracy was good, but not exceptional. His shooting stance was textbook perfect. His breathing control was excellent, and his groupings were tight and consistent. The instructors noted solid fundamentals, adequate marksmanship. By the end of the first day, Jake had completed every test and exercise. His scores were respectable across the board. Not the best in any category, but competent in all of them. The instructors compared notes and reached a consensus. Humans appeared to be a reliable but unremarkable species. Good for support roles, backup positions, and general duties. What they didn't notice was something that would become important later. While other trainees rested between exercises, breathing hard or showing signs of fatigue, Jake simply stood, ready for whatever came next. When others needed water breaks, Jake waited patiently. When others stretched sore muscles or sat down to recover, Jake remained alert and prepared. Instructor Thelnex mentioned this to Instructor Velnoth during their evening review. The human shows no signs of fatigue, unusual for a species with average physical capabilities. Velnoth, who came from a low-gravity world where endurance was less important than agility, dismissed the observation. Probably just species-specific recovery rates. Some beings process oxygen more efficiently. That night in the sleeping quarters, Jake's squad mates discussed the day's events. Veltar's skin shifted through various colors as he talked about the different tests. You did well for your first day, Jake. Solid performance across all categories. Not flashy like some of us, Crix added, but reliable. That has value in squad operations. Noma's thoughts touched Jake's mind. Your consistency is notable. Many species excel in one area but struggle in others. You maintain the same level across all tests. Durgan nodded approvingly. On my world, we value steady strength over quick bursts. You have that quality. Jake listened to their comments and felt a bit disappointed. Back on Earth, he had been selected for this program because he was among the best soldiers in his unit. Here, he was just average. What happens to average trainees? He asked. They graduate and get assigned to support units, Veltar explained. Not everyone can be elite assault troops. The galaxy needs soldiers who can handle standard operations, reliably. Is that what you want? Durgan asked. Jake thought about it. I want to be the best I can be. If that's support operations, then I'll be the best support soldier they've ever seen. His squad mates made various sounds of approval. determination, was something they all understood, regardless of species. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Jake performed competently in every area of training: tactical simulations, combat exercises, equipment maintenance, team coordination. Always solid, always reliable, never outstanding. The instructors began to use him as a baseline for measuring other species. Human-level performance became their standard for acceptable but unremarkable results. Jake worked harder than anyone else, staying late to practice, studying tactical manuals during free time, and volunteering for extra training sessions. His effort was noted, but attributed to species dedication rather than individual drive. What no one realized was that Jake was holding back without knowing it. The gravity at the academy was exactly like Earth's, which felt comfortable and easy to him. The exercises were challenging but manageable. The pace of training was demanding but sustainable. Jake had grown up running in mountains where the air was thin, carrying heavy packs across rough terrain, and training in conditions that changed from blazing heat to freezing cold. The controlled environment of the academy felt almost relaxing by comparison. But since no one asked about Earth's actual conditions, and Jake had no reason to think they were unusual, he simply adapted to what was expected of him. He performed at the level that seemed appropriate for the training environment. The instructors continued to mark him as a competent but unremarkable trainee, perfect for support roles but unlikely to excel in elite positions. They had no idea. They were about to discover just how wrong their assessment really was. 3 weeks into training, Jake had settled into the routine of academy life. Wake up, run, eat, train, study, sleep, repeat. His performance remained steady and reliable. His instructors had stopped paying special attention to him, filing him away mentally as another competent but unremarkable trainee. Instructor Velnoth had been watching Jake during combat training sessions. The human moved with basic efficiency, nothing more. His punches were adequate, his kicks were textbook standard, and his grappling techniques were competent but predictable. It was almost boring to watch compared to the spectacular displays from other species. Velnoth came from Siran, a world with gravity barely half that of the Academy standard. His people were tall and thin, built for graceful movement and precise strikes rather than power. He had always found it amusing to watch heavier world species struggle when gravity was increased even slightly. During the lunch break, Velnoth found himself talking with other instructors about the various trainees. The crystalline beings are showing excellent progress in energy manipulation, Instructor Keth Ara reported. And the hive mind species have mastered small unit tactics better than any previous class. What about the human? Asked Instructor Thelnex. Any notable development? Velnoth made a dismissive gesture. Consistent mediocrity. He performs every task adequately but shows no exceptional capabilities. Very predictable. Perhaps his species needs more challenging conditions to excel, suggested Instructor Zorthak, whose own people thrived under extreme pressure. Doubtful. Velnoth replied. Humans evolved on a standard gravity world with moderate conditions. They appear to be built for comfortable environments, not challenging ones. An idea began forming in Velnoth's mind. What if he tested that theory? Just a small experiment to see how the human handled real pressure. Nothing dangerous. Just a minor increase in training difficulty to see if Jake would crack under stress. That afternoon's combat training was scheduled in Chamber 7, one of the newer facilities with variable environmental controls. Jake's squad was running through basic hand-to-hand combat scenarios against holographic opponents. The exercise was straightforward. Defeat a series of enemies using only physical combat techniques. Jake moved through the scenario with his usual competent efficiency. Block, strike, dodge, counter. His form was technically correct, his timing was adequate, and his power was sufficient to defeat the simulated enemies. Nothing impressive, nothing terrible, just standard performance. Velnoth watched from the control booth above the training floor. With a few quick touches on the control panel, he quietly increased the gravity in Jake's section of the chamber from standard 1.0 G to 2.0 G. The change was gradual enough that Jake wouldn't notice immediately, but it should make movement much more difficult and tiring. The other instructors in the booth were focused on different trainees, so none of them noticed what Velnoth had done. He leaned back to watch what he expected would be an amusing struggle as the human tried to adapt to doubled gravity. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Jake's movements suddenly became more focused and deliberate. His stance dropped, lower, becoming more stable and grounded. His punches, which had been technically correct but ordinary, now carried serious power behind them. The holographic enemies that had been taking multiple hits to defeat were now going down with single strikes. Velnoth blinked and checked his controls. Yes, the gravity was definitely at 2.0 G in Jake's training zone. But instead of struggling, the human appeared to be getting better. Jake moved through the combat scenario like a different person. His footwork became more precise, each step calculated for maximum efficiency. His breathing remained steady despite the increased gravitational stress. Most remarkably, his speed hadn't decreased significantly. He was moving more deliberately, but not much slower. The holographic enemies increased in difficulty as the scenario progressed, but Jake adapted to each new challenge with growing confidence. He used the increased gravity to his advantage, dropping his center of balance lower for better stability and letting the extra weight add power to his downward strikes. Other trainees had stopped their own exercises to watch. Veltar's skin shifted to confused purple as he observed Jake's sudden improvement. Crix's compound eyes focused intently on the human's movements. Durgan, who struggled to move effectively in anything above 1.4 G, watched in amazement as Jake operated smoothly under twice standard gravity. Noma's thoughts touched the minds of nearby trainees. The human is not struggling. He appears to be thriving. Jake completed the combat scenario in his best time yet. When the exercise ended, he stood calmly in the center of the training area, barely breathing hard, despite having just fought under crushing gravitational force that would leave most species exhausted or unable to function. Velnoth stared at his control panel in disbelief. He ran a quick diagnostic to make sure the gravity controls were working properly. They were. The human had just performed better under doubled gravity than he had under normal conditions. Down on the training floor, Jake rolled his shoulders and stretched his neck. Something had felt different during that exercise, but he couldn't quite identify what. The movements had felt more natural somehow, more solid and grounded. Like he had been training in water before and was now finally on dry land. The other trainees approached him as he walked toward the exit. "Jake," Veltar said, his skin now bright yellow with curiosity, "that was a remarkable performance. How do you feel?" Jake considered the question. "Good, actually. Really good. Like I was finally able to move the way I'm supposed to." Crix tilted his head. "You seem different. More focused. More powerful." "I felt more connected to the ground," Jake said, trying to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. like my movements had more weight behind them. Durgan looked at Jake with new respect. On my world, we train young warriors under increased gravity to build strength. But most species cannot function well above their native conditions. You moved like the gravity was helping you instead of hindering you. In the control booth, Velnoth was frantically reviewing the session recordings. He played back Jake's performance frame by frame, comparing his movements under standard gravity to his movements under doubled gravity. The difference was stark and undeniable. Under normal conditions, Jake moved with textbook technique but limited power. Under doubled gravity, he moved like a trained killer. His strikes were harder, his balance was better, his overall combat effectiveness had increased dramatically. Instructor Thelnex noticed Velnoth's intense focus on the recordings. Something interesting happened during the exercise? Velnoth hesitated. He had made an unauthorized change to training conditions without approval, which was against protocol, but the results were too significant to ignore. The human performed unexpectedly well under stress conditions, he said carefully. How much stress? Doubled gravity. Thelnex's antennae twitched with surprise. And he adapted successfully? More than adapted. He excelled. His performance improved across all metrics. The implications hit both instructors simultaneously. If humans performed better under increased gravity, rather than worse, then everything they thought they knew about human capabilities was wrong. As Jake left the training chamber with his squad, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. The exercise had felt different, more natural and effective than any training he had done since arriving at the academy. That evening in the sleeping quarters, his squad mates were full of questions about his performance. Jake tried to explain how the movements had felt more solid and powerful, but he struggled to put the sensation into words. Perhaps your species requires more challenging conditions to reach full potential, Noma suggested through their mental link. Most species perform worse under increased stress, not better, Veltar added. Your improvement was significant and obvious. Durgan nodded thoughtfully. My people have legends about warriors who fight better under difficult conditions. We call them pressure fighters. They need adversity to show their true strength. Jake lay in his bed that night thinking about what had happened. He felt more energetic than he had in weeks, like some part of him that had been sleeping was finally waking up. The increased gravity had felt right in a way that normal gravity never had. What he didn't know was that in the instructor quarters above, Velnoth was filing a report that would change everything. The human hadn't just adapted to doubled gravity. He had requested more. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new tests, and the beginning of a revelation that would shake the foundations of what the Galactic Defense Academy thought it knew about human capabilities. The next morning brought an unusual tension to the Academy. Word had spread among the instructors about Jake's performance under doubled gravity, though the details remained unclear to most. Velnoth had spent a sleepless night reviewing the combat recordings and running calculations that didn't make sense according to standard galactic biology. Jake woke feeling more rested than he had since arriving at the academy. His body felt loose and ready, like a machine that had finally found the right fuel. During the morning run, he found himself holding back to avoid outpacing his squad mates by too much. The standard track felt almost easy now, as if he was running through thick air instead of normal atmosphere. Breakfast in the dining hall was the usual mix of strange foods and stranger conversations. Jake's squad sat at their regular table, but he noticed other trainees glancing in his direction more often than usual. Whispers followed him in languages he couldn't understand, but the tone suggested curiosity rather than hostility. "You have become somewhat famous overnight," Veltar observed, his skin shifting to an amused orange color. "Other squads are talking about your performance yesterday." "What are they saying?" Jake asked, eating something that tasted like spicy chicken but looked like blue pasta. Crix's antennae twitched as he translated overheard conversations. "Many things. Some say you were enhanced somehow. Others believe you were hiding your true abilities. A few think the gravity controls malfunctioned." Durgan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a rumble that only their table could hear. "What do you think happened? You were there. You felt the difference." Jake considered the question carefully. "It felt like I was finally able to move naturally. Like before, I was holding myself back without realizing it." Nama's thoughts touched his mind gently. Holding back from what? "I don't know exactly. Just that the weight felt right. The resistance felt normal." Before anyone could respond, an announcement echoed through the dining hall. "Trainee Jake, Martinez report to Instructor Velnoth immediately after breakfast." The conversations around their table stopped completely. Being called for individual meetings was unusual unless someone was in serious trouble or showing exceptional promise. Given Jake's reputation as a solid but unremarkable trainee, most assumed it was disciplinary. Jake finished his meal and made his way to the instructor quarters. The hallways here were different from the trainee areas, with higher ceilings and walls covered in awards and honors from past graduating classes. The air smelled of ozone and something metallic that made his nose itch. Instructor Velnoth's office was a small room filled with holographic displays showing training data and performance metrics. The instructor himself stood with his back to the door, studying a replay of yesterday's combat exercise. "Trainee Martinez reporting as ordered, sir," Jake said, standing at attention. Velnoth turned around, his tall, thin frame moving with the careful grace of someone from a low-gravity world. His large eyes studied Jake with an intensity that was uncomfortable. "Sit," Velnoth said, gesturing to a chair that adjusted itself to Jake's human proportions. "We need to discuss your performance yesterday." Jake sat down, wondering if he had somehow violated training protocols. "Was there a problem with my exercise, sir?" On the contrary, there was something very interesting about it. Velnoth activated a holographic display showing Jake's combat performance. "Tell me, did you notice anything unusual during the training session?" Jake watched himself move through the combat scenario on the display. Even he could see the difference in his movements compared to previous recordings. "The exercise felt different, sir, more natural somehow." "How so?" "My movements felt more solid, more connected, like I had better control over my body." Velnoth made notes on his crystal tablet. "Did you feel any additional strain or difficulty during the exercise?" "No, sir. If anything, it felt easier than usual." The instructor paused his note-taking and looked directly at Jake. "The gravity in your training zone was increased to twice standard levels during that exercise." Jake blinked, processing this information. "Doubled gravity, sir?" "Yes. I made an unauthorized adjustment to test how your species handles stress conditions. What I observed was unexpected." "I didn't realize the gravity had been changed," Jake said honestly. "It just felt like things were working the way they should." Velnoth leaned back in his chair, studying Jake like he was a puzzle with missing pieces. "Most species show decreased performance under increased gravity. Slower movement, reduced endurance, loss of coordination. You showed improvement across all measured categories. Jake thought about this. Back on Earth, he had trained with weighted packs, body armor, and equipment that added significant mass to his movements. Maybe that experience had prepared him for higher gravity conditions without him realizing it. Sir, on Earth we often train with extra weight to build strength and endurance. Maybe that helped me adapt. What kind of additional weight? 60 to 80 pounds of equipment was standard for field exercises, sometimes more for specialized training. Velnoth's eyes widened slightly. Most galactic species considered carrying an extra 20 pounds to be extreme training conditions. And this was normal training for your military? Yes, sir. Basic requirement. For all soldiers. The instructor made more notes, his stylus moving rapidly across the crystal surface. I want to conduct another test today. With your permission, I would like to increase the gravity further and observe your performance. Jake felt a surge of excitement that surprised him. The idea of training under even more challenging conditions appealed to something deep in his nature. How much further, sir? I was thinking 2.5 G. A significant increase, but still within safe parameters for most species. Jake considered this. 2.5 times Earth gravity would be substantial, but something about it felt right. Like he had been training with training wheels and was finally ready to take them off. I'd like to try it, sir. Velnoth made a final note and stood up. Excellent. Report to Chamber 7 in 1 hour. I'll be monitoring from the control booth. Jake stood and headed for the door, then paused. Sir, may I ask a question? Yes. If 2.5 G goes well, could we try 3.0 G? The request hung in the air, like a physical thing. Velnoth stared at Jake with an expression that mixed shock with fascination. 3 times standard gravity was considered punishment-level conditions by most galactic standards. Some species couldn't even survive at 3.0 G, let alone function effectively. You want to train under 3 times standard gravity? Velnoth asked slowly. Yes, sir. I think it might help me reach my full potential. Velnoth sat back down heavily. In 30 years of training soldiers from across the galaxy, no one had ever requested increased gravity. Species typically pleaded for their training to be conducted under their optimal conditions, usually lower than standard. Why do you want more gravity? He asked. Jake thought about how to explain it. Because yesterday felt like the first time I've been able to show what I can really do. If doubling gravity improved my performance that much, I want to see what happens with more. The instructor's mind raced through the implications. If humans not only tolerated, but thrived under increased gravity, it meant their entire assessment of human capabilities was fundamentally wrong. More concerning, it suggested that humans had been operating at a fraction of their true potential. Since arriving at the Academy, I will consult with Commander Zethkri about a 3.0 G test, Velnoth said finally. For now, we'll see how you handle 2.5 G. Jake saluted and left the office, feeling energized in a way he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. Finally, he might get the chance to find out what he was truly capable of. In the hallway outside, he nearly collided with Durgan, who was waiting with the rest of Squad 7. Well? Veltar asked, his skin cycling through anxious color changes. They want to test me under increased gravity, Jake said simply. How much increase? Durgan asked. 2.5 times standard. Maybe. 3 times if that goes well. The corridor fell silent. Other trainees walking past stopped to stare. Crix's compound eyes widened to their full extent. Noma's form flickered with what might have been shock. 3 times gravity? Veltar whispered, his skin now pale yellow. That's impossible. No, one can fight effectively under those conditions. We'll find out, Jake said with a grin that was becoming familiar to his squad mates. It was the same expression he wore when facing any new challenge, a mix of determination and anticipation. That suggested he was finally getting the chance to show what humans could really do. News of Jake's upcoming test spread through the academy faster than wildfire. By the time he arrived at Chamber 7, what was supposed to be a private evaluation had become the most anticipated event in recent academy history. Trainees from Babamozayati, every squad had found reasons to be in the observation areas, and instructors who normally wouldn't associate with each other were gathered in the control booth. Commander Zethkri stood at the center of it all, his scaled face unreadable as he reviewed the data from Jake's previous performance. Behind him, medical teams prepared emergency equipment that had never been needed during routine training. 3 times standard gravity wasn't just challenging, it was potentially lethal to most galactic species. Jake entered the chamber wearing a standard training uniform fitted with additional monitoring equipment. Sensors tracked his heart rate, breathing, muscle tension, and brain activity. A medical technician, a being that looked like a walking crystal formation, ran final checks on the monitoring systems. All readings nominal, the technician reported, in a voice like wind chimes. Subject appears relaxed and eager. In the observation areas, Jake's squad mates pressed against the reinforced windows. Veltar's skin was cycling through colors so rapidly, it looked like a living kaleidoscope. Crix had positioned himself for the best view, his compound eyes tracking every detail. Noma floated near the ceiling, their translucent form shimmering with nervous energy. Durgan stood with his massive arms crossed, but his expression showed concern mixed with admiration. "The human is insane," whispered a trainee from Squad 12, a serpentine being whose own species couldn't handle gravity above 0.8 G. 3 times standard will crush him. "Look at him," Durgan rumbled in response. "Does he look worried?" Jake stood in the center of the chamber, rolling his shoulders and stretching his legs like an athlete preparing for competition. The gravity was still at standard levels, but he could feel the anticipation building in his muscles. Everything about this felt right in a way that training had never felt before. Commander Zethkri's voice echoed through the chamber's speakers. "Trainee Martinez, we will begin with 2.5 G for initial assessment. If you experience any distress, call for immediate termination of the test." "Understood, sir," Jake replied, dropping into a ready stance. "Initiating gravity increase," announced Instructor Velnoth from the control booth. The change was gradual, but noticeable. Jake felt his body getting heavier, his movements requiring more effort. But instead of struggling against it, he adapted his stance and breathing. His center of gravity dropped lower, his feet spread wider for better stability, and his muscles engaged more fully to support the additional weight. At 2.5 G, most species would be moving like they were underwater, fighting against crushing pressure just to stay upright. Jake looked like he was warming up for a real workout. "Remarkable," breathed Dr. Cathera, the Academy's chief medical officer. "His vital signs are completely stable, no stress indicators whatsoever." "Begin combat scenario," Commander Zethkri ordered. Holographic enemies materialized around Jake, starting with basic opponents and gradually increasing in difficulty. What happened next would be talked about in Academy halls for decades to come. Jake moved through the scenario like gravity was his ally instead of his enemy. His punches carried devastating power, enhanced by the additional weight behind each movement. His kicks were precise and bone-crushing. When he grappled with opponents, the increased gravity gave him leverage that made him nearly impossible to move or throw. The holographic enemies that normally required multiple hits to defeat were going down with single strikes. Advanced opponents that usually challenged even elite trainees were being systematically dismantled by a human who looked like he was just getting started. "This is impossible," muttered Instructor Thelnex, watching the display readings. "His performance metrics are off the charts." Jake's movement had evolved beyond simple adaptation. He was using the gravity creatively, dropping low to avoid attacks, and letting the extra weight add momentum to his counter-strikes. When enemies tried to overwhelm him with numbers, he positioned himself so their own movements were hindered by the gravity while his remained fluid and controlled. The scenario automatically increased difficulty in response to Jake's success. More enemies, faster attacks, complex terrain obstacles. Jake met each escalation with growing confidence, his combat style becoming more refined and efficient as he learned to work with the increased gravity. In the observation areas, the watching, trainees had gone completely silent. What they were seeing challenged everything they thought they knew about physical limitations and species capabilities. "Look at his technique," Veltar whispered. His skin now a steady, odd gold. He's not fighting against the gravity. He's making it part of his fighting style. Crix's antennae were vibrating with excitement. "Those movement patterns are completely new. I've never seen combat techniques designed to use gravity as a weapon." Noma's thoughts touched the minds of nearby observers. The human is not just surviving this, he is thriving. This is his natural element. The combat scenario ran for 45 minutes, longer than any trainee had ever sustained at standard gravity, let alone 2.5 G. When it finally ended, Jake stood in the center of the chamber, breathing steadily but not heavily, looking around for more opponents. "Scenario complete," came the announcement from the control booth. "All objectives achieved with optimal efficiency." Jake looked up at the observation windows where hundreds of alien faces stared back at him in amazement. Then he did something that made the entire academy hold its breath. "Commander Zethkri, sir," he called out clearly. "Request permission to attempt 3.0 G." The silence that followed was absolute. In the control booth, instructors looked at each other with expressions, ranging from disbelief to genuine fear. Medical personnel checked and rechecked their readings, unable to believe what they were seeing. Commander Zethkri studied the performance data scrolling across multiple screens. Jake's combat effectiveness had increased by over 60%. Compared to his baseline performance under standard gravity, his endurance seemed unlimited. His technique had evolved during the test, becoming more sophisticated and deadly as he adapted to the conditions. Most importantly, his vital signs showed no stress, no fatigue, no indication that he was pushing anywhere near his limits. "Dr. Kethara," the commander said quietly. "Medical assessment?" The crystal-formed doctor consulted her instruments. "All readings are within normal parameters for this species. Heart rate elevated but steady, breathing controlled, muscle tension appropriate for activity level. No signs of distress or impending failure." Commander Zethkri made a decision that would change galactic understanding of human capabilities. Forever. Request approved. Initiate 3.0 G gravity field. The change to triple gravity was more dramatic. Jake felt his body suddenly weigh 3 times normal, every movement requiring significant effort. But instead of being crushed by it, he felt something click into place, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. This was it. This was what he had been missing. Under 3 times Earth gravity, Jake Martinez began to show what humans were really capable of when they stopped holding back. His movements became economical and devastatingly effective. Every action was calculated for maximum impact with minimum energy expenditure. He moved like a predator that had finally found its ideal hunting conditions. The Academy's combat training. Systems, designed to challenge the galaxy's most elite soldiers, couldn't keep up with him. Holographic enemies fell like wheat before a scythe. Obstacle courses that normally took hours were completed in minutes. Accuracy tests that stumped. Veteran trainees were passed with perfect scores. Jake wasn't just adapting to triple gravity, he was mastering it, turning what should have been a crushing handicap into the ultimate competitive advantage. When the session finally ended 2 hours later, he stood calmly in the center of the chamber, barely winded, and asked the question that would echo through galactic military circles for generations. "Sir, is 4.0G possible? I think I'm just getting warmed up."